My name is Sasha DeVore, and I'm a writer and the author of the Wake Trilogy. The first book that really impacted me was The Giver by Lois Lowry. I remember riding in the back of my foster mom's Yukon, and I just finished the book, and I closed it up, and I remember looking at her while she was driving and saying, I want to write a book one day that makes other kids feel this good. Another piece of literature that really impacted me as a child was Harry Potter. I remember listening to the audiobook in 7th grade. I would sit there with my book open, and I couldn't wait for the audio to read it, so I just went ahead and read ahead of the class, and I just had that very personal introduction to Harry Potter in my own little world. I absolutely did not write when I was younger. That was a hobby that started in my mid-20s. I was working at a mental hospital when I was inspired to write the Wake Trilogy. I remember having this recurring dream that was just so action-packed and memorable that happened to be set in a mental hospital. So I pulled out a pad and a pencil and I just wrote down, everything in my dream that I could remember, and that was like the very beginnings of Wake of Deception, which is the first book. I have stacks and stacks of these, and they are all written on and in and around, and this is the first step in the elimination process. I handwrite my first draft because I feel like it's more personal and intimate. I really still am in love with the idea of just touching the pencil and paper and doing it very viscerally, just like reading a book. So this is just pretty much my record keeper, my thought keeper, and just step number one in my writing process. This is the Wake Trilogy, Wake of Deception, book number 1. Wake of Descent, 5-star reader's favorite. And the finale is Year 1, which was released this June. The process of publishing a book is pretty complicated, especially if you want to maintain your own freedom. So when I initially looked for agents, a lot of feedback I got was, well, you have to write urban in order to sell, or write about your experience as a Black person in order to sell more books. And it just I felt like that was taking away my personal vision. So I decided to go self-published. And so with that route, I just had to be my own agent and seek out editing and book cover design and things like that. So I very much I shifted from being a writer to a businesswoman, and so I had to just fulfill those services myself or reach out to get those services. It is still very rewarding, especially when you get to the final stages of releasing the book and people actually buy it. And I have a couple people who catch me on social media and ask questions, or tell me what they thought about the book, and that's the most exciting part, is getting the feedback about it and seeing that other people have enjoyed the story too. So funny behind the scenes, there are 2 funerals in book 3, and as I'm writing the second funeral, it was for one of the pretty major characters, and so I'm writing this scene and I'm just crying because I've gone through the last 3 books with this guy, and he was a huge part of my heart, but he had to die. My husband's walking by and my son's walking in and out of the kitchen, and I'm like trying to hide my tears, and then I realized how stupid this is, that I'm killing this character. He doesn't have to die, but I'm like, no, he has to die. And I'm crying and mourning, and I'm so sad about it. And I think, sometimes I think I'm crazy that I have to do this, but that's part of being a writer. So this is an excerpt from the very last chapter of book 3. I think this is probably the most impactful thing of all 3 of these books that I've written. So our main character, Hanu, is attending a funeral, and so I'll begin. He wound his way toward the plot, gazing tearfully over Capital City. It had grown quite still over the last 3 years. After the wave of anger roared through the cities, there was fear. Then there was sadness. The masses were unsure of what to believe in anymore, and it showed. but Hanu had his companions to believe in. They had all gone through the thing together from the very beginning, and they'd held each other up in times of the most uncertainty. Not everyone was as lucky, and so the transition into knowing was a very difficult one for humanity. The disillusionment of not being as alone in the universe as they thought, while on the other hand being completely alone, sovereign in constructing their own destiny, was a curious juxtaposition. And this was the obstacle that humanity would have to overcome. I'm Sasha DeVore. Thank you for coming on this virtual vacation with me. You can find my books at sashadevorebooks.com.